is up. We are back. New season of college hoops, 24-25 season starts in a couple weeks. Gavin and I have been grinding behind the scenes, getting ready for the season. With all the transfer portal, getting ready is a bit tougher. But we are pumped to be back. We're going to be doing 5 of these preview shows for the Big 5 conferences. A bit bigger of conferences this year, especially the ACC. We have a couple new teams joining the league. So we got an 18-team show tonight, Gav. How you doing?
Yeah, good, man. Excited for another year. Was a great betting year, was less than great DFS year. Both of those kind of got me working and dialed in a little bit earlier. So excited to kind of get things going. You mentioned the new teams in the conference. Yeah, football-driven decisions is why you bring a multitude of teams that are going to be in the bottom of the conference. That's not going to be great, for their analytical rankings, and probably places them at, as the worst power conference of the 5, but, still some good teams that are definitely going to contend for, late season tournament berths.
Yeah, I think we have some high upside teams in this league. I think the floor of this league overall is going to be a bit better than last year, especially in the middle. But there are some teams at the bottom that did not get better, and some that got a lot worse. I was able to put together some graphics for this. So as we go through each team, and we're going alphabetical order here, just in the transfer portal, it's just easier to kind of have it on the screen for everyone. So since we've got 18 teams, let's just dive right into it, because we're going to be breaking down all of them in detail here. So we'll start with Boston College. Awesome season Boston College-wise last year. They end up 71st at Ken Palm Gav, 20-16 last year. But man, Earl Grant has some losses here. One of the best Boston College teams probably in the last 20-25 years, led by Quentin Post. Jaden Zachary's gone as well. Their top 2 players, McLaughlin as well. They bring in a couple lower-level transfers, Deion Brown from UMBC, Roger McFarland from Southeast Louisiana. And then Chad Venning from the Bonnies is interesting for sure. What are your first initial overall thoughts about Boston College here, Gav?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, it was definitely a historic Boston College team. It was the first Boston College team that finished inside the top 100 in defense under Earl Grant. And if they're not going to out-defend you, if you're going to be able to score on them, like especially this year with what they lost offensively, you mentioned Quentin Post, you mentioned Claudell Harris, Devin McLaughlin. It was the 55th best offense in the country too. That's just incredible for BC. And they're not really replacing it with much of reasonable ACC players. I mean, it's a catastrophic NIL situation for the team. So yeah, they're probably the best case scenario is not finishing last, I think, for Boston College. They're really operating as a mid-major in a power major conference in the NIL era.
Yeah, the team just gutted. Basically, anyone of importance that didn't graduate bailed for more NIL money. So yeah, let's run through real quick who we might be using this season. I mentioned Chad Venning and Deion Brown. I think 2 at least interesting guys here. Deion Brown from UMBC, top 100 usage guy nationally. Negative assist to turnover ratio, so probably a better DFS type of play than real life player. But average 1.09 fantasy point per minute in his conference last year. And then Chad Venning, I think, is the other guy of interest here. Like I said, from the Bonnies, big man, was efficient on a per minute basis, but they used the bench a lot at St. Bonaventure. Had an elite block rate, 38th nationally, 8.5% block rate. So those are kind of the 2 guys that I had on my radar here for Boston College. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, Deion Brown is an elite positional rebounder. 7.5 boards at 6'3", because you're not going to be playing Boston College guys for their scoring upside, right? If you're not putting up peripherals as BC guys, they're going to be some of the worst team totals on every single slate we play the entire year. Non-conference, conference, doesn't matter. So yeah, like someone like a Deion Brown with usage, with peripheral upside is probably like really going to be the only one in play, short of mispricings and whatnot. I mean, maybe Venning if he gets thrust into the starting lineup, Mark Schmidt actually played his bench somewhat at St. Bonaventure for the first time in half a decade, but he's got a little bit of upside, I think, to be kind of a mid-range play that maybe comes into play in a best case scenario, but just a miserable team overall.
Yeah, my last note here on BC, Earl Grant really pushed the tempo up. 227th 2 seasons ago, all the way up to 55th last year, but not really sure if that's sticky with the current roster that he has. That might have just been kind of a product of who he had at the time. Any last notes here on BC?
No, I mean, like, are we going to be playing Josh Beadle? Like, I mean, who's going to shoot on this team? BC lost 62% of their entire 3-point attempts last year, just between Post Harrison and Mason Madsen. So it's like, yeah, it's going to be a bad scene up in the Northeast.
Hopefully not a lot of Josh Beadle and Chaz Kelly, but it probably will be. All right, let's move on to Cal. Cal had a decent season last year for them. They finished 121st at Ken Palm. Big losses here, though, Gav. They lose, obviously, Jalen Tyson and AMAC to the professional ranks. They lose Jalen Cohn, Keontae Kennedy, and Jalen Celestine. So 5 of basically all of their production last year is out the door. They hit the transfer portal pretty hard. Mark Madsen brings in a dozen transfers here, headlined by Rydas Petritis from Air Force and Stojakovic from Stanford, I think are the 2 of note here. What do you think about the turnover here for Cal?
Yeah, I mean, they had a good first year under Madsen. They went 13-19 overall, which many would think is not good. They also improved 25 Ken Palm spots, so call it, over expectation. But like you said, had an NBA first rounder, had a guy who's playing professionally overseas in IMAC. Yeah, I mean, Rydas Petritis is going to be a very interesting DFS asset. Like, usage wise, he's a hub power forward that you can play through on the elbow. He has a great assist rate, top 150 nationally, has an elite Hakeem rate, which is basically, stocks, blocks plus steals. We're going to be playing some Rydas Petritis. I think a lot this year. Stojakovic was high pedigree. He also had a 90.70 rating his first year at Stanford. So, by the way, that was the 4th worst rating in the Pac-12. Like he's next to guys like Casey Ibekwe, rating wise. Okay, that's how that. I mean, I don't know if that's maybe not Page's kid, but has his last name or what. But yeah, he obviously is in kind of a breakout category, just with the role that he's going to be assumed in this offense. The other, I think it revolves around Petritis, Stojakovic, and then Jovan Blackshear is really interesting, right? This is 2 years ago, the guy who's the preseason WAC player of the year at Grand Canyon, tears his ACL a couple games into the season, sits out the whole year. Last year, comes back first year off injury and is behind Tyon Grant Foster and Ray Harrison, like 2 of the 10 best mid-major guards in the country. Like, he could be a definite microwave offensive spark plug that we look to at a good price DFS wise, but mainly going to revolve around those 3.
Yeah, Petritis, we used him in spots last year, had an awesome role for Air Force. I just don't see how he is not the usage leader here. Has always had good peripherals. Stojakovic, like you said, struggled as a frosh, but, he was a high recruit coming in. I know the national guys like him, but that could be more of like a name value thing than anything else. Blackshear, yeah, I agree there. He's just he's pretty small, 5'11", 150. We'll see how that translates up. But, yeah, I think it's going to be those 3 guys for DFS. I will say pretty good tempo for Cal under Madsen, Gav. 116 in year 1 after they were 343 prior to him coming in. So, we get pretty good tempo here. The defense is probably not going to be great. So we could have some DFS spots. Like, we played a lot of Cal guys last year. I know both of us played our fair share of Tyson and AMAC. I know Keontae Kennedy was in play a bunch too. So I think the tempo helps these guys be in play, even though the team's going to be pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree. They have like a Joshua Ola-Joseph and Sissoko just as general rebounders. Who knows like what their prices come in at against a bad rebounding team. It's not to say that they can't get there. But yeah, I mean, this team got rolling late when Keontae Kennedy came back. When you had Jalen Tyson and IMAC at full health, like later towards the season, I mean, this team was much better. Like I think Mark Madsen is honestly one of the better coaches in the conference. Especially that nobody's talking about or that nobody really knows of. Like, I just, I think they're probably projected correctly, 108 to 135, Bart Torvik to KenPom. I think that's probably right around, top 100 team, which will be, another improvement on Cal last year.
Yeah, I kind of think the Torvik ranking is probably about their ceiling. I mean, they lose 2 pros and they're not bringing in a lot. I think I'm more in the KenPom 135-ish range, but, he has built a program there. Any last words here on Cal?
I think we mainly covered it for a team that probably got a little bit more time than they even deserve.
All right. Well, let's move to a team that definitely deserves some time after their season last year, Clemson. They finished the year 19th at KenPom after the Elite Eight run. Really, really fun team that gained a lot of steam down the stretch, Gav. Played awesome at the end of the season, including that run in the tournament. Big impact losses here, though. PJ Hall out the door. Joe Girard played really well for Clemson, and Jack Clark is also gone. They bring in some really interesting transfers, though, here, led by Vic Locken from Cincy, Jaden Zachary, and Miles Foster. Thoughts on Clemson, how they finished last year, and how they're transitioning into 24-25?
Yeah, it finished 5th in the ACC, which I think was probably, around general expectation. Ended up 19th on KenPom because of that run. Like, there's also kind of, look, if you look at the games that Clemson played, they're a very high 3-point rate defense. They underscreen all the time and force you to shoot over the top of them. New Mexico, Baylor, Arizona shot a combined 14 of 75, 18.6% from 3 in the tournament games that they lost. Bama then shoots 44% from 3 and beats them. So, like, yeah, I guess you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? So they probably weren't the 20th best team in the nation. They definitely, found some positive defensive shooting regression their way, but yeah, it still, brings in a lot of guys. PJ Hall's on-offs were not even that great. I just think like the foul situations that he ran into, they played probably a lot more without him on the floor than they wanted. And Shefflin was, maybe the breakout of the conference. Like it was a walking double-double, and we thought PJ Hall was going to be the ACC Player of the Year kind of thing. Like bringing him back is huge. But yeah, the Joe Girard, I think, is actually even tougher to replace. Like, dude shot 41% on 253s. Like that's insane volume. Just an absolute shot hunter, dead eye sniper. Like it's going to have to be taken on, I think, by a couple of guys. One of them obviously being Chase Hunter. One of them is going to be Jake Heidbreder from Air Force is going to have to take on some of that. And then like, you can't really run the same 5-out offense that you ran with PJ Hall with Victor Locken. I don't think. Maybe you can. Like, it's not like Locken is any sort of special shooter. Is he a threat? Maybe to some extent, but yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think the other thing you got to consider with this team, easiest schedule projected by Bart Torvik right now in the ACC. Play Duke once, play UNC once, play Louisville, Wake, and Miami once. So it's a pretty good team. It's a really old team, a veteran team with a really easy schedule. I think a really high floor, but maybe not the ceiling of some of the teams at the top.
Yeah, I was just about to say the exact same thing. I think it's a really, really high floor team. You got 3 seniors / 5th-year guys in Chase Hunter, Shefflin, and Vic Locken. I really like the Locken pickup overall. Was always a big-time per-minute guy at Cincy. Basically split time at the 5 there. I was going to ask you, Gav, so Brownell has relied on big-time minutes from his big guys in the last couple of years. If he ups Locken's minutes, I mean, he was at, 21.7 minutes per game last year and even 1.00 fantasy point per minute output. I think this would unlock a big-time ceiling for Locken. Shefflin's going to eat into him for sure, or maybe even the other way around with the way that Shefflin played last year. But I just really like the front court here in a conference that I don't think there are that many teams that have good front courts. Like we'll get to the Big Ten always has great front courts. I don't think that we have that here as much in this conference. So it's a different type of team than a lot of the teams here. They're old. They've done it. Chase Hunter made a huge step last year. Not the best DFS player, but real life. I thought he really made some strides. I think the Zachary pickup was interesting. I don't love it. But it does give you a secondary ball handler outside of Hunter, because the other guys on this roster you don't really want to have dribbling the ball that much. Wiggins, Shefflin, Locken, and Heidbreder.
Yeah, you mentioned Chauncey Wiggins. Like, he's going to have to take a step. He's kind of a swing, small forward, power forward, like long, like 6'10" guy, spot up shooter, 65th percentile catch and shoot, point per possession. That probably even needs to improve. He's going to have a ton of open looks this year. He's going to have to knock him down. Victor Locken is the highest projected defensive BPR on Evan Mia this year in the entire ACC, which I think really, BPR is derived from, one, your team's overall, efficiency on offense or defense, and two, your on-offs on that specific side of the ball. So it speaks to, like, even when Bandego was playing at Cincy instead of Locken, it wasn't as good as Locken on defense. So yeah, like that was, PJ Hall didn't play as good a defense because he fouled his ass off too much last year. Locken has some of those worries, but if he cleans up fouls, yeah, he's paving the way for a much more substantial role than he's had in the past at good rates.
Yeah, I think that we could see him push 24, 25 minutes a game here, which is going to make him an awesome DFS play. We mentioned the breakout of Shefflin. I've seen a bunch of national guys have him as a breakout guy this year. I think he's like borderline, could be first team all conference. Forget a breakout. That has already happened. He averaged 10.1 and 9.4 last year. Any last thoughts on Clemson here before we move on?
No, I mean, lots of like solid core forward, 2 shooters. No way this team finishes like outside, the top 40. I think pretty much a lock for the tournament, but don't know about the second weekend upside.
Yep, agree there. All right, let's move on to one of the big boys, Duke. Bunch of key losses here for Duke. They finished last season 7th at KenPom, 27-9, 15-5 in conference. Really good defensive team overall at KenPom, 16th. I think that's going to improve this year. They obviously lose Filipowski and Jared McCain, first-round picks. Jeremy Roach transferred out. Mark Mitchell, Sean Stewart also transferred out here. But, Gav, they bring in a bunch of recruits here, including Cooper Flagg, the number 1 overall recruit, probably going to be the number 1 pick in next year's draft, along with 3 other 5-star recruits. But I think the transfers that they brought in are really, really going to help them. Malik Brown from Syracuse, Mason Gillis, just like the prototypical glue guy, and Sion James from Tulane. I think those are really good pieces for a winning team like Duke, especially a young team like Duke. What do you think about the moves in the offseason here?
Yeah, it's definitely Shire's best job in terms of roster construction. Like, the team is clearly specifically designed around Cooper Flagg. There's multiple high upside frosh with not only Flagg, but Colin Malawach he could have a 15-minute role and be a top 5 to 10 pick in the NBA draft, like just with the tools that he has at 7'2". And everybody's just dropping their panties already for Con Knipple and what he's doing kind of in the early preseason. So you have the high upside frosh. You have proven vets that, I mean, you could plug them in on any team and these guys are going to fit. Malik Brown, Mason Gillis, Sion James. It doesn't matter how the team plays, what they do, they're going to fit just with their skill set. So
I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of the perfect mesh of that. They have multiple returning ball handlers with untapped upside in terms of, like, Tyrese Proctor, we still haven't fully seen it from. Caleb Foster, we saw it in flashes, but had the injury, had multiple guys in front of him. There's rim protection, there's shooting. They're top 3 on Torvik on both sides of the ball. And it's hard to argue how this team isn't top 5 to 10. I would say that Shire's postseason runs might even be better than his regular season outcomes the last 2 years. Losing the ACC by 2 games to UNC wasn't as much about Duke not living up to expectations as it was UNC just going 17-3, having a top 10 defense and just being unbelievably efficient. So yeah, I mean, this is the year where Duke is going to be the favorite because it's the product of bringing in multiple 5-star recruits every year. Just the composite talent on the team is going to be higher than everybody. So their ceiling is just a different level of the entire conference. But, I think, they have to speed up this year, use the athleticism. Like, they've been crawling up the court last couple of years. They got to run, especially with like multiple rip and run guys like Cooper Flag, Zion James, Tyrese Proctor, all going to be elite rip and run guys in transition. So that's kind of the main hope for the team, I think.
Yeah, that was actually my first team note. Coach K's last year, 172nd in tempo. The 2 seasons under Shai are 298 and 253. They really have to run more. I agree with you there. Huge offensive improvement last year from 40th and adjusted efficiency all the way up to 8th. Our main note on our sheet last year, Gav, on this team was that they needed to improve the 3-point shooting. They did that. 15th best 3-point percentage in the country. I think they're going to have that again here with Proctor, Foster, Gillis, and James here. So yeah, I think it's a really good team. Second on Torvik and KenPom. I'm a bit lower than them, or on them than that. But man, like Malik Brown, just what a great pickup. Like you were saying, led the ACC in 2-point percentage and steals per game last year at Syracuse, 3rd nationally in effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage, top 30 in steal percentage, elite defender. Doesn't even need to touch the ball to impact games and to have good DFS games too. We've seen big time minutes from John Shire with the guys that he trusts, Gav. So I think these guys are going to be good in DFS. Proctor, I'm still not fully sold on after all the juice last year. I know that both of us were much lower on him than consensus. So, but yeah, I think it's a health thing for them in the backcourt because they're not as deep as they were last year, Gav. Like it's Proctor and Foster, and then the freshmen. They don't have Roach there and McCain to kind of fill in if guys get hurt. I don't know. I think the depth in the backcourt is a bit of a concern here for such a highly touted team. And I think Malawak, although he has the upside, he's supposedly extremely raw. The other freshman big man, Ngongba, who's number 28 overall, is already hurt. So I think that there are holes you can poke in this team overall, even though I do like them.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about a team of this caliber on paper, the question only becomes, like, how doesn't it work, right? That's more difficult to find than why are they going to be good? I mean, it starts with Cooper Flag. I don't think there's any realistic outcome where he's not one of the best defenders literally in the nation. I think that it's unfortunate that his name is going to beckon a DFS price that's going to make him much tougher to play. But like, I think he's going to be just a stock machine. Like he's going to be one of the elite Hakeem rate guys. So how doesn't it work? It's like, if Flag's offense isn't quite ready, the shooting isn't quite as developed. He's having trouble with guys getting up into his jersey, being more physical with them. He is a reclass after all. Like, yeah, he's 6'9" and plays like he's basically a shooting guard, but he's also young and relatively frail. You mentioned Malawach. If he isn't ready, that's one way. If Tyrese Proctor is kind of the same old, just I'm here, I'll shoot when I'm open, but I'm not going to be any sort of alpha on the team. If Con Knipple is not all that's chalked up to be, Mason Gillis doesn't shoot 48% from 3, then this team is probably more in the 15 to 20 range, but it's like, I don't know how I see him falling out, kind of beyond that. I think it's much more likely probably in the 4 to 8 range, is kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I am too. And yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to hate on Duke. I'm just trying to poke holes in what is obviously an awesome team. I think they should start Malik Brown. just such a winning piece. Any last notes here from Duke? For DFS, I think you're right. I think Cooper Flagg is going to be, we've seen these incoming Frosh just be super expensive at the start. And only a couple of them usually start the season on fire. So be interesting to see where they price these guys to start. I think Malik Brown will be super interesting if he's cheap enough. Proctor and Foster last year, 0.71 and 0.6 fantasy points per minute. That is not in the range that you want to be. We want like 0.8 and up. So I'll be interested to see, I don't think we played that much Duke overall outside of Filipowski last year and some Mark Mitchell. Just kind of a lot of mouths to feed, which is what happens on good teams.
Yeah, backcourt's going to be much better to target than the front court. Malik Brown's going to have the Malawach eating into his minutes. He's going to have Mason. You could even play Mason Gillis as like small ball 5 for stretches, or if that means Cooper Flagg's at the 5 and Gillis is at the 4. So, yeah, a little bit of worries there. I think, Proctor and Foster will be generally kind of cash guys relatively consistently.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving. Florida State is up next. Tough season for Florida State last year by their standards, 17-16, 79th at Ken Pom. And they have some losses here. Darren Green finally gone out the door. Cameron Fletcher transferred. Jalen Worley transferred, and Cam Corrin is also gone. So a lot of overturn here, but they do retain Jameer Watkins. That would be, I guess, their biggest I'll call it a transfer portal pickup because he was in the portal and he came back. So I will include him in the portal pickups. Jameer Watkins, one of the best transfer pickups in the country last season, absolutely crushed. And they picked up a couple other guys, Boston Holt from South Dakota. But this team looks to take a step back here, Gavin. I'm just not seeing it with like the top 7 or 8 from this team. What do you think about the makeup of this team overall?
Yeah, well, they tied for 8th in the ACC last year, which I'd say was pretty decent kind of for the roster that they had. They finished 6 spots better on Ken Pom than they started. They also haven't made the tournament since Scotty Barnes is on the team. And it's not just a question of stepping back for me. It's how far is the step back? And so I went back to the team 2 years ago that finished 205th on Ken Pom. Okay. Now, part of that had to do with going 2-9 in non-con. You lose to Stetson and Troy at home. You lose to Siena on a neutral. That team still went 7-13 in conference, which is not overly miserable. It's not good. It's not great. It might not even be bad. It might be slightly worse than that, but that team also had Caleb Mills, Matt Cleveland, Darren Green, Cam Corrin, Cameron Fletcher. There were actual players on that team, and they just couldn't figure it out that year. There is nothing on this team outside of Jameer Watkins, and maybe some godforsaken shot on Taylor Bull Bowen developing that leads you to believe that this is a top 100 team, as is currently indicated by their 94th Bart Torvik ranking and 90th Ken Pom rating. There's no way this is a 100 top 100 Ken Pom team. I'm more thinking are they going to make it into the top 200? They're going to need some help in the non-con, having a bad performance, but my God, this team is bad. And with a 4-star, not even top 100, 101 overall recruit, those guys usually don't translate to being, very productive guys on a consistent basis. So
he's going to start from day one too.
And it's a big shot in the dark outside of Jameer Watkins with this team. Yeah,
I think the depth is a huge question here, Gav. Their top 2 guys off the bench are like a JUCO transfer and a guy from Hampton. Daquan Davis is the 4-star point guard that you're talking about, number 1 overall, expected to start out of the gate. Jameer Watkins is the story here. Yeah, so Gav, we're going to talk about them next. So Georgia Tech is 2 spots lower than Bart Torvik than Florida State is. I think I'd have Georgia Tech at least 20 spots ahead of Florida State. But yeah, so you mentioned Bull Bowen here, who's a top 50 guy last year. Nice stocks in limited minutes last year. I think he's going to start. I think that this could be one of like the cheap guys that we lean into early in the season for DFS. There is always the Leonard Hamilton running 10 guys issue. I don't know how he's going to do that this year because I only see 7 or 8 guys on the entire roster that that I would give minutes to. 3-point percentage defense last 3 seasons, 325th, 344th, 282nd. Just horrible defensive teams the last couple of years, and I don't see that improving. I think this could be Hamilton's last year. Honestly, I think he could just retire after this season. He's obviously not hitting the recruiting streets as hard as he used to. He's not getting the Scotty Barnes anymore. And yeah, like I could see this team bottoming out and finishing in the back half, the back 5 of the ACC. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll kind of, quote unquote, give it away. I have them at the top of the final tier of the ACC, and that is only due to the fact that they have one of the 5 to 7 best players in the conference, probably, and have no business having him. You're right; he is a transfer portal pickup because he had no business coming back to Florida State. Like, yeah, Leonard Hamilton was a great coach. There's just a multitude of these kind of older guard guys that if you're not going to adapt to kind of the modern way of basketball, in addition to also then embracing kind of the NIL era, you're just going to fall behind. And that's kind of where Leonard's at. Florida State's is in a bad spot this year.
Yeah, they are. Let's keep moving. Let's go to Georgia Tech. I mentioned that they're right near Florida State at Torvik. They're 96th to start the season at Torvik. They ended last season 123rd under Damon Stoudemire. But I thought they showed us some really good signs last season. They lose Miles Kelly to the transfer portal. Debo Coleman's gone. Kyle Sturdivant's gone. Ty Claude is gone. But they bring in some interesting transfers headlined by McCollum from OU. What do you think about Georgia Tech going into this season? Obviously, a super young team last year.
Yeah, they tied for 12th in the ACC. They started, 118th at Ken Pond. They finished 123rd. They had a lot of young guys, and as such, were susceptible to high variance outcomes. I mean, they beat North Carolina. They beat Clemson. They ran Duke down to the wire for everything they had at Georgia Tech. They also lost to Louisville with Kenny Payne Louisville, right? Remember that, and UMass Lowell. So I think, the main positive that you came out with was finding your young core, being Nathan George and Baye Ndongo. Georgia Tech, Damon Stoudemire being a pro guy, obviously it's going to be a high pick and roll game, 90th percentile frequency, ball handler usage, and roll man usage, which means that they're running a shit ton of pick and roll. So they're shot a lot of threes. The Georgia Tech offense as a whole is looking much more modernized than it was under Pastner. Yeah, JV McCollum is, an adult in the room next to those guys to be kind of more instant offense. Like you can just get late in the shot clock, throw it to him and say, oh, fuck, go score, and he's going to give a pretty good effort. Miles Kelly, I thought almost like kind of gave up on the situation. Like, I'm not surprised at all that he went immediately into the portal right after the season. You could just kind of tell in his body language that he was just not about it. So, yeah, the George and Ndongo and build around that. You got Jay McCollum. You bring back Kawasi Reeves, who, be the fourth option, Kawasi, and be a decent defender, and that's all he really needs to do. So, I'm really long on the Georgia Tech program. Projected 70th on Ken Pom feels pretty ambitious. 96th on Torvik and 94th on Mia feels probably more correct. I think they're kind of in that 80 to 100 range. But yeah, I think, there is some upside. Like if George turns out to be a dude, if Ndongo, who might be like one of the most vertical athletic bigs in the conference, if he takes another step, especially with his block offense, there is some upside that they could finish, towards the upper end of the middle of the pack of the ACC. But I think back end of the middle is probably where they're staring at this year.
Yeah, I like the starting 5: George, McCollum, Reeves, probably Luke O'Brien or Lance Terry, and Ndongo. So I think that there's some upside in that starting 5. You mentioned McCollum had a good season at OU after transferring in from Siena. Year one at Stoudemire, from 192nd in adjusted offensive efficiency all the way up to 111th. That's a pretty big bump, and bumped the tempo up to 168. They were outside the top 200 prior to him arriving. We didn't mention Lance Terry. He's back. He missed all of last season. He just gives them some additional depth. Let's talk about DFS real quick. Dongo is probably the highlight here, 0.96 fantasy point per minute in his freshman season. I was surprised that he had the worst BPR on the entire GT roster last season. I don't think that that's a huge concern moving forward. He's going to be a really good DFS asset for us, just with the rebound rate and the block rate being high. If he sustains and even improves off of year one, which he should, I think that he is going to be a guy that we go to. I think the backcourt's going to be a bit muddled just because there are multiple guys that can get there. What do you think?
I think role allocation is actually really straightforward, and there's definitely something to speak to that with teams. It's going to start with George with the ball in his hands. Like, if it's not going to be a pick and roll, finding Ndongo, then the first look is going to be to McCollum. And then if it's like Reeves on a skip or the weak side, that's basically how the offense is going to go. Luke O'Brien's a body. Lance Terry's a body. They're not really guys that we're going to be worried about for DFS. The Ndongo rates, I looked into it on Hoop Explorer. It's actually crazy. The percentage of mid-range jumpers that opponents made while he was on the floor versus when he was off, which tells me that it's not super indicative. It's why his on-offs aren't as pretty, but there was like an 18% discrepancy, which probably tells me that opponents were relatively lucky. Just happens to be like when he was on the floor. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's a good core to build around. Team's going to be fine, in good hands with a coach. They're working for in 2 years, just like kind of like a Notre Dame.
Yeah, I like this roster more than Notre Dame. We'll get to them in a bit. Let's keep them moving here. Louisville's up next. You did our team sheet for Louisville, and I love that your key losses was the entire roster, and the key newcomers was the entire roster. Obviously, that happens when you have a big coaching change. Kenny Payne is mercifully gone. They bring in Pat Kelsey from Charleston. I'll kind of give you the reins here since you did the further dive on this team. It's all brand new faces. And tell us a bit about Pat Kelsey. We know that he likes to run a deep bench.
Yeah, kind of just, we'll get into the players, but more from a macro sense. Kenny Payne played fast in his second year. Pat Kelsey is going to play way faster and going to shoot way more threes. It's not going to be, a heavy pick and roll. He's going to try to run 5 out if possible, which is exactly why he brings in someone like a Noah Waterman. He's obviously a higher end coach coming from the mid-major ranks. I also think that there is something to say about the hype that he gets from the national media based on his kind of energy and persona, and is he really like an elite coach like in this conference? I just don't know if I'm there yet, but it's kind of funny, like Louisville and Kentucky, ton of really solid, they bring in a ton of really solid diverse pieces to implement in a bunch of different ways with a good X's and O's coach. It's all seniors, no freshmen. It's like both rivals are rebuilding with new coaches in completely different ways than they've ever done in the past. And that's the the portal era. There's a ton of guys to run through kind of on the Louisville side. Probably we should try to probably just highlight a couple of them, and otherwise we'd spend 20 minutes, just like the sheet took 2 hours to do, filling in all these new guys.
Yeah, it's actually cool. I love that he just ejected the entire roster and brought it in. It also showed.
I said if I was Pat Kelsey, dude, I would have literally fucking ripped the wallpaper off the walls. I would have taken the wood out of the locker room. I would have taken the floor out of the gym. I would have removed any semblance of Kenny Payne and the stink of that fucking existence in that locker room and program. So he should have.
Well, it also shows just how miserable of a coach Payne was, because he complained for 2 years that it was tough to overturn a roster, and Pat Kelsey did in about a week and a half.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is going to be spacing, threes, pace. I think probably a better real life team than DFS, just because like we've seen Charleston on slates. They run a deep bench, probably top 30 in bench minutes. And this is a deep team with guys that he promised minutes to. So why don't you go ahead and highlight a couple of the guys coming in? We got Terrence Edwards from JMU, Keyshawn Pryor from South Florida, Traore from Beach, and Chucky Hepburn from Wisconsin as the top 4 guys, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I did kind of a quick Twitter thread just like on Terrence Edwards. Like he's looked at as kind of the dude of this roster, right? I mean, he went from 6th man of the year in the Sun Belt to Sun Belt Player of the Year. He also had that was his first full year in a starter role. 6'6", tough shot maker, but wasn't efficient in transition on a points per possession basis. He actually had more pick and roll usage possessions than the entire Charleston team did last year. So it's like it's not really a scheme to highlight or accentuate Edwards' advantages. Like he would just in pick and roll, he would shake and back up and shoot a 3 or take somebody off the dribble. He only had 2 dunks the entire year. So there's not a bunch of upside in athleticism. It's small margin shot making. He's a good player, no doubt. But I think kind of people who are saying, first team all conference are just way, way out ahead of their skis in this situation. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that's supposedly the dude that they're going to be looking at. It wasn't, the most efficient scoring in the ways that Pat Kelsey is going to play offense most frequently is my issue. So you go from
Also, he's not playing 33 minutes a game here.
He may play he might be like the highest minute per game guy. It actually, might be Chucky, which I'll get to next. But I think he could be. I think he's one of the 2 guys that really have that upside. I think outside of that, it becomes a total mismatch of whatever Kelsey wants to run at a given time in the game.
Yeah. So the reason I say that, last year Charleston 24th nationally in bench minutes. Their highest guy was playing 24 minutes a game. So I saw ESPN had Terrence Edwards on their first team all conference. It's just ridiculous. He's not going to have the counting stats on a roster like this. I think their best player is Keyshawn Pryor. Awesome season at South Florida. Kind of a weird season too, Gav. There was some lack of effort that was noted, didn't start every game. Probably not a great defensive player, but man, the counting stats are there for Pryor if he's on the court. So really like him. Chucky Hepburn, we are both noted Hepburn, not haters, but just didn't think that he had the ceiling that some people in the national media did. And we've been right so far. What do you think about his fit here?
Yeah, I mean, there's been out of the last 3 years when Chucky was a starter at Wisconsin, there's been 2 years where he's had mega usage on that team, and 1 year where he's kind of taken the back seat. Right, last year was taking the back seat to AJ Storr. Wisconsin finished 17th in KenPom. 2 years ago, it was Chucky in high usage. Wisconsin finished 61st in KenPom. Year before was Chucky in low usage. Wisconsin finishes 37th. He's solid, right? He's solid on defense at the point of attack. He's a good facilitator with a decent assist to turnover ratio. He's definitely not the guy you want to have the ball in his hands late in the game. He's not the go-to kind of alpha scorer. He's a guy who's not going to ever win you the game, and he's very rarely going to lose you the game too. So I think he's good in the sense that he's a very mature, steadying piece on a team with a ton of question marks of what the hell is going to happen. So yeah, I'm fine with Chucky Hepburn in this fit with Pat Kelsey. The 3 should accentuate kind of some of his strengths. He's been a decent 3-point shooter for stretches of his career. So we'll see.
Yeah. Speaking of 3-point shooting, last note, and then we'll wrap up. Louisville, Rain Smith, 40% on 281 attempts last season. Probably comes off the bench here, but he is going to be a nice piece for them. Any last thoughts on Louisville here?
Yeah, he was the main gunner. A couple other guys we need to touch on. James Scott is one of two guys that Pat Kelsey brought over from Charleston. You know, the main gunner, Rain Smith, that you mentioned. James Scott is a really interesting incoming sophomore that has a lot of upside in not only his rates, but he's almost got some kind of pro qualities in terms of the way that he moves, the way that his shot looks, and the way that he can kind of stretch it. Like, I mean, he's got some real upside where if he could be a guy we'd look to late in the year. I definitely want to note him. You know, like Javon Hadley's he's like a slashing two-way off-ball guard from Colorado. You know, a fine piece, not a great piece. Corin Johnson, I think, is kind of interesting, right? He's kind of the fireballer, microwave scorer off the bench. You know, and then Abubakar Traore from Long Beach State, like 6'6" Swiss Army knife defender, like was the second highest rebounder in the Big West each of the last 2 years. At 6'5", 6'6", like there's a lot of really good pieces, which would tell me that it actually has a higher floor than you would think for a team just fully implanting a whole new roster, but don't quite know if they have the ceiling, especially if Terrence Edwards isn't, you know, a first team all conference kind of guy. If he is, then yeah, maybe they challenge for kind of the top three of the conference, but I think more in kind of the 4 to 6 range is viable for him.
This team is old as shit. I mean,
yeah,
their top, 7, 8 guys are all seniors, fifth years, or I think Waterman's a 6-year. I probably like Hadley more than you. He was rock solid on that Colorado team. More of an ancillary piece, though.
He's the only guy who stayed healthy.
Yeah. All right, let's keep it moving. Let's go to Miami. Woof. What a season last year for Miami and Jim Larinaga. They finished 15-17, Gav, 96 at Ken Palm. The bottom just fully fell out. They ejected, went 0-10 after, of course, beating my Hokies randomly on February 3rd. They didn't have a win after February 3rd, Gavin. So it's not surprising that they had a bunch of guys leave. Keyshawn George to the NBA, drafted by the Wiz. Omir is out. Wooga Poplar transferred. Bensley Joseph transferred. That's 4 of their top 6 pieces from last year. They bring in a top 10 recruit, though, Jaleel Bethea, who is supposedly a mega athlete. And then some other interesting pickups. Brandon Johnson, we've seen him on a couple slates. Gav from ECU. Lynn Kidd, who really played well. One of the only bright spots of the Virginia Tech team last year. And then a couple of guards, Staten McRae from Sanford and Jalen Blackman from Stetson, who had like a massive game in their conference tournament. I think he put up like 43 to win a game there. What are your thoughts on this roster? Lots of turnover here. They basically only bring back Nigel Pack and Matt Cleveland from last year's team. I'm actually surprised that anyone came back after that shit show. We've got a pretty big discrepancy between Torvik at 25 to start the season and Ken Palm at 55. I don't know what the hell Torvik's looking at to get to 25 here. I don't see the ceiling, specifically defensively. There's not one good defender on this roster unless the freshman is going to be a good defender. What do you think overall?
Yeah. Oh, brother, they finished behind Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, and Boston College last year in the ACC. It finished 14th to 15th. Like it made some of Rory McIlroy's ejects look like fucking child's play, losing 10 games in a row, 11 of their last 12. And yet still, like when I'm doing this ATS, coaching stuff over the last 3 years, like Larinaga is still an elite ATS guy over the last 3 years, even with just taking off the back half of ACC play this last year. The roster additions are interesting. Like Bethea is billed as basically a tough shot-making combo guard. There's another guy on Texas that we'll touch on of kind of similar ilk. Some of these guys that can get a little bit jumper happy, have maybe questionable shot selection when not playing in a super highly organized scheme at kind of the amateur level, but still bring back Nigel Pack, still bring back Matt Cleveland. Like that's going to kind of keep you at least, relevant in kind of the middle of the hunt for the conference. I think the Brandon Johnson, Lynn Kidd combo is super interesting, man. Like Lynn Kidd was a mega efficient rim scorer, was an elite rebounder. And Brandon Johnson is a power forward that shot 35.8% on 173 threes last year. Like, I think it's one of the most complementary pairings actually in the conference. And I think part of how the offense can really help, like having that stretch out on the perimeter to give lanes to guys like Matt Cleveland, Buffet, and Pack, I think I'm all right. I'm not okay with 25. I'm probably also not okay with 55. I think I'm kind of like in the 35 to 37 to 42 range maybe for this team. Like I think, middle of the ACC, but nothing special. Probably on the right side of the bubble, but maybe they win a game, but definitely not second weekend by any means.
Yeah. Lynn Kidd, what a freaking season he had last year. My God. 1.04 fantasy point per minute last season, just didn't get the minutes to fully crush, only 23 game. Yeah, no, I think this team is going to score. This team is going to score, and they're going to score efficiently, and I think they're going to give up a shitload of points. I think this is going to be a really fun team for DFS. We know that Larinaga does not like to play his bench much. Look at the minutes from the returning guys. Maybe that's why Pack and Cleveland came back, because they're playing 35 minutes every game. But yeah, I think the top three are going to be great for DFS. We'll see how Johnson and Kidd kind of platoon there, because I don't see that much behind them in the front court. And then I want you to touch on the Staten McRae and Blackman transfers. Blackman just seems like a microwave bench scorer who doesn't really give you anything else, especially peripherally. When I was charting him, wow, 30th nationally in shot percentage, but didn't really do much else. Not a good defender. And then Staten McRae was actually committed to the Hokies, but backed out and chose Miami. He was on a Sanford team last year that made the tournament. So I think he's an interesting piece for sure. 1.09 fantasy point per minute last year in kind of a half a game role for Staten McRae, because Sanford played very, very deep bench.
Yeah, they're both fine bench pieces. Just having two bench guys means that Miami is probably even deeper than they've been the last couple of years. Larinaga doesn't play his bench guys regardless. Like nobody plays defense in the A-Sun either. So yeah, like Jalen Blackman was a microwave at Stetson, but the level of defense and athleticism is just going to be night and day. So yeah, the efficiency is going to drop, but he'll be fine off the bench. Problem is he's got a top 10 recruit in front of him. He's got Nigel Pack, a 12th year senior scorer in front of him, and he's got like another former 4-star in Matt Cleveland like in front of him playing like in the front court. So it's going to be hard for him to find minutes, but yeah, he'll be fine. Yeah,
no, I just meant more for the team overall, not for DFS. I think that those are solid pieces to bring in. Any last thoughts here? I think we are going to be playing a lot of guys in Miami games in DFS. I just think that they're going to run 110th in tempo last year, and they have guys who can score at all 5 starting positions, and none of them defend well.
Yeah, not a ton to add. I mean, defense has never been a Larinaga calling card, so where they're projected at 76 wise. Yeah, it's probably a little bit overrated. So yeah, that's probably what is anchoring a lot of the KenPom, ranking of, or is it 25 that they said on KenPom, right? That's Torvik. No, so yeah, I'm getting them confused, but yeah, I think so. Their defense probably isn't top 75, but it never really has been like in some of these good Larinaga teams. It's been all driven by NBA level shot making guards, which they at least have one of. At times can get to with Packs. I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, and it's not like the guys they brought in the front court can guard anyone either. Brandon Johnson more of a stretch, and Lynn Kidd. All of his energy goes to offense. We saw that last season. All right, let's keep it moving here. Let's go to UNC. Really, really interesting team. I think the UNC versus Duke debate is super interesting this season. They ended up 29-8 last year, 9th at KenPom overall. They opened 6th at Torvik, 14th at KenPom. So a bit of a difference there for Carolina. Last season, of course, ended with that insane game against Bama in the tournament. 89-87. They have massive losses. Obviously, Baycott finally gone to the NBA. I actually saw him last night in one of the preseason games getting a couple minutes. So that's good to see. And then I think a massive loss. What a pickup Harrison Ingram was for Carolina last season. They bring in, as always, some top recruits. Ian Jackson and Drake Powell are both 5 stars. And then a couple transfers. Cade Tyson from Belmont I'm sure you'll tell us about him, and then Lubin from Vandy. What do you think about the overall roster construction for UNC going in?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to last year, like winning the ACC by 2 games, lost by 2 in the Sweet 16 in a game that Bama shot 42% from 3. We're like, I don't care if you're the friggin' Lakers. Like, if Bama shoots 42% from 3, it's going to be tough to beat them just with how many they shoot. But, like, why did we underrate UNC? You said it. The number one thing I had was, like, Harrison Ingram was an absolute dude. Change of scenery, former high pedigree guy. The role allocation was elite on the team. Defense jumped from 46 to 8th, which I think was kind of the big one. But you lose Baycott, Ingram, and then Cormac Ryan too, kind of some of that role allocation. So the other thing with Carolina is, like, year over year, they're going through this. This is going to be a big schematic transformation because they're going to go from a mega heavy post up team to being almost fully guard driven, like, relying on penetration off the bounce and athleticism. This is also Hubert's first year without Armando Baycott, believe it or not. So going to be a little different from them. Yeah, the other thing you got to bring up is that friggin' scrimmage, man. Boy, if Seth Trimble and Elliot Cadeau look to have taken, real steps on the offensive side of the ball, then yeah, this team's going to be good. It's going to be a little bit weird because I don't know how exactly they're going to play. Like, Jalen Washington did show some stretchability in the scrimmage, which means, like, if they run 5 out, the driving lanes for these athletes off the dribble are going to be insane. Like, you also bring in, you mentioned Cade Tyson, like, potentially one of the best shooters in the country. And, at like 6, I think he's like 6'9", can play the 3, can play the 4. He's not going to be anything special defensively, but when you have the athleticism of guys like, like a Seth Trimble, guys like a Jalen Withers can guard 3 and 4 at a better defensive level. He's not the best offensive guy, but Ian Jackson and Drake Powell are going to be probably better defenders. I don't know how far along the offensive game is, but yeah, I mean, boy, I have Duke kind of on their own tier just because their ceiling outcome, if everything hits, is just higher than, maybe nearly anybody's in the country. But boy, I don't want to overreact to that scrimmage, but it feels like the margin might be shrinking a little bit just with what I saw on a long-term translatable level. Not just that Seth Trimble hit 6 of 10 threes. It was that Jalen Washington had no hesitation in shooting threes, that he moved his feet better on defense. It was that Cadeau was much more confident in shooting the ball, and Seth Trimble the same way. Like, there was a lot to like in that scrimmage. Van Allen Lubin looked like dog shit. I mean, he looked like he had cement blocks for feet. He literally looked like the worst big on the floor, and I was kind of high on him coming into the year.
I think he might get squeezed on this roster with the guys.
He's going to be the guy who you can't play at the 4, whereas you can play Withers at the 4. You can play Washington at the 4 because of their, like, Withers can actually put the ball on the deck. It wasn't always pretty, but he can take mismatched power forwards or centers off the dribble and at least create mismatch problems. Whereas, dude, Lubin looked bad. It was really bad just watching him. So yeah, overall, it's hard not to grow on that team just seeing, the output when you match that with the ACC Player of the Year. But it is a large task overhauling an entire scheme change year over year with a coach that I'm not enamored with X's and O's wise.
Yeah. Well, he proved last year that he could put guys in the right spots. Like what he did with Ingram and Ryan, I thought was really, really good. Where I'm at with Carolina, I think that their floor is higher than Duke's just because of the guard play. It's a guard-driven league. It always has been, especially the ACC. And UNC's got the best guard duo maybe in the country. RJ Davis, obviously a top 3 to 5 player in the entire country. Cadeau, elite recruit last year, had a really good season overall. 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, even more than that, and actually graded out as UNC's best defender on MIA, which surprised me. They bring in the 2 5-stars. I just think that this team is going to be really, really fun. I think they're going to run it even more than they did last year. I was listening to Hubert Davis on with Rothstein, and he said that they want to be top 25 in tempo. I think that makes sense with this roster, especially if Jalen Washington is going to start. he was the guy when I did the sheet, Gav, that I was basically like, man, if this guy gets minutes, his rates last year were so good. 1.05 fantasy point per minute for Jalen Washington behind, obviously, Baycott last year. I just think that this roster fits together so well. RJ Davis is going to keep them afloat, even if things go wrong with the 5-star freshman. I just think that the floor of this team is like 10 or 12. And RJ, obviously, like guards can carry you to runs in the tournament. Yeah, the front court is a bit of a concern now, but it's just because we haven't seen these guys play. Like, just because Jalen Washington played 8 minutes last year per game doesn't mean that he isn't going to step in and be good. So, Withers, like you said, didn't shoot it well last year, but 42% the year before at Louisville from three. So he does have it in there, and he was a nice bench piece last year. So I just think that the roster fits together so well, especially if Jalen Washington is the player that I think he can be. I have UNC over Duke again, like I did last year, just because I just don't believe as much in Proctor and Foster long term. So I really like UNC. I think this team, Gab, is going to kick the shit out of a bunch of teams in non-conference. Like, they're going to put up 90, 100 points on some of the early teams. That was kind of a long-winded way of talking through all my thoughts on Carolina. Any last thoughts for you?
Yeah, I agree with the non-con bullies. Like, I mean, if you cannot stop dribble penetration on this team, they're going to put up 90 on you. It wasn't that. I think what struck me about the tempo in the scrimmage wasn't what made them push the ball a bunch was the Cadeau throw ahead passing, where you're not literally throwing it to a guy who's streaking down the side and just going to take 2 steps and lay it up, but you're throwing it ahead in front of half court so that somebody who can also dribble into the key and put penetration or put pressure on the rim. The pressure that you can put on teams in transition, like it might be the best transition team in the country, like by the time it's all said and done. So yeah, I'm definitely getting there where they're a lot closer to Duke for me. So I'm not quite as where you're at, where they're clearly better, but I'm getting close.
Yeah, I don't think they're clearly better. I believe in a strong backcourt, and I think they have the best in the country. All right, let's keep it moving. We're halfway through, and we're at just over an hour, so we got to speed up a bit to get under 2 hours here. Let's go to NC State. Man, what an end of the season for NC State with the crazy run in the tournament behind both the DJs, Horn and Burns. Burns got all the media hype, but DJ Horn and Mo Diarra. I mean, this team started to go to cruise when Diarra started playing 35 minutes a game. I think he was just such a big key to them. So they lose their top 3 guys here. They bring in Huntley Hatfield from Louisville, former 5-star, and Dontrez Styles and Mike James. Pretty big drop-off, I think, coming for NC State. Where are you at with them overall, Gav?
Yeah, think about this team before the run, right? They finished 10th in the ACC. They end ACC play going 2-7, right? They're 78th in KenPom at that point. Kevin Keats is literally about to lose his job if they don't win the ACC tourney and get a tournament bid, and then the rest is history, right? They got all the way to 45th from 78th, and now they're ranked 52nd on KenPom, right? So what's more indicative of where this team was at last year, 78th or 45th? Like, I'd probably go with the 3/4 of the year at 78th than the 45th. But I think what the whole thing about last year was, like you said, you start playing through DJ Burns at the elbow, you stretch Diarra out, like you found his stretchability to combine with his rebounding. He was the elite defender in the front court, so you can throw Burns on, the lesser matchup. It kind of all clicked at the same time at the right time, But what do we have here? Like, think about the caliber of guards that NC State has had in recent years, right? Some guy, Terquavion Smith, right? Jarkel Joyner, even Darion Sebron, 2-3 years back. DJ Horn was that dude last year, and now that's Jaden Taylor.
Dennis Parker, come on.
I got my issues about Parker too, but like, Jaden Taylor was a guy who, he had a career best 105.0 rating last year when he was the fourth or fifth option on the floor.
Yeah.
Previously when we saw him at Butler as kind of the main go-to guy, it was a 94.50 rating. So it was high volume, low efficiency. Dennis Parker, he was actually good off the dribble. He was like a 70th percentile point per possession dribble jumper guy, but was horrible on the catch and shoot. So the ball has to be in his hands more often than not, which it also has to be in O'Connell's hands because he doesn't shoot. And it also has to be in Marcus Hill's hands, the transfer from Bowling Green, because he can't shoot. So
I think this team's in trouble.
This team's in deep shit. Like, I mean, Huntley Hatfield may average double-double this year, and the team could still, finish just terribly. Mike James and Dontrez Styles from Louisville and Georgetown, respectively. Like, they had decent roles minutes-wise, but they're not going to see that this year. Like, so when you look at like the 3-pointers of this team, right? When you talk about like spacing and shot gravity, I think I did a tweet last year that talked about just how important spacing is to offenses. And I think it was like 15 of the top 20 spacing offenses were in the top 25 in adjusted offensive efficiency. And there's like nobody, I don't know if anybody on this team can shoot, in all honesty. Like, you're talking about Jaden Taylor and Dontrez Styles were like the 3-point shooters last year. So I don't really know how it works. Kevin Keats is not a scheme heavy guy. He relies on more kind of, NBA talent level guards like a Terquavion Smith, like a Jarkel Joyner, to go make it happen off the bounce. And I don't think this team has any of that at all. So it's this, I don't know how many more years Kevin Keats bought with that run, but it could be so ugly this year that it may not even matter, in all honesty.
Yeah, I think he probably bought sometime. I mean, they made the fucking Final Four, but I just don't see it on this roster. You mentioned the lack of shooting. The top 8 projected guys combined to make 6.4 threes a game last year. It's just not gonna. It's gonna be weird. I picked Parker as the guy because I just he was a top recruit for Keats last year. I just think with the guys that they have, they kind of give him the keys.
You know what I like about Dennis Parker? He's not Jaden Taylor.
Yeah, right. Like he actually has upside to grow into more. He was kind of logjam last year behind guys who were really getting it done. So, like you weren't going to play him over Horn and Morcell last year, but on this roster, I think he just has to, like, he is the key. My issue with the transfers is, so you brought in guys from Bowling Green, who was 239th at KenPom, 2 guys from Louisville, and a guy from Georgetown. Guys who, I'm not sure if they impact winning. Last note here on NC State, Middlebrooks off the bench was actually really good. Best BPR on last year's team, playing 16 minutes a game after coming over from Clemson. Probably cedes a bunch of time to BHH, but just a guy that I wanted to note here. I think this is going to be I would be shocked if this team finishes top 60 like they have on both sites here.
Yeah, not a chance. Not a chance top 60.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Notre Dame. Everyone's in the national media is slobbering over this team because Shrewsbury's a nice guy and everyone wants him to succeed. Last year, 13-20, 118 at KenPom. Torvik and KenPom. This is on 66 and 69. This team doesn't lose pretty much anything. They lose Kerry Booth. They bring in Matt Aloko from Princeton and a couple other pieces, which makes sense because it was basically all the freshmen last year, new coach. So they're, this is kind of the first team that it's not at least a partial overhaul. It's just kind of, developing the young players. We saw Marcus Burton just have an awesome season. He is the headliner here. Lead guard, played 34 minutes a game as a freshman, 0.92 fantasy points per minute for DFS, 9th nationally in percentage of possessions. Kind of wild that he averaged almost 18 points a game on such a slow tempo team. What do you think overall about Notre Dame? I am not as high as others on this team. this year, at least.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned how young they were. They were 357th in D1 experience last year. It started 165th in Ken Palm, finished 118th. It's clockwork for sure. It's like, at least the national media understands that he's one of the best coaches in college basketball. So that's fine. The problem is that the best coach in college basketball history can only coach so much. And the roster's still kind of lacking. I understand kind of the continuity of it. But the 58 and sorry, I'm looking at NC State now. The 66 and 69 is, I think, definitely way more towards their ceiling. Like, I guess the ceiling outcome is being at the, like, jumping into the, what I would call kind of the third tier of teams with like Louisville, Pitt, Virginia, jumping into that, but I don't think they're surpassing that. So that's basically, I have like the best possible outcome is 6th in the ACC. Yeah, ceiling outcome's probably like, on the wrong side of the bubble. I'd imagine if everything goes right, Marcus Burton's going to be a nightly, DFS asset to be looked at, no doubt. Third in the country in returning minutes behind Wofford and Navy, and neither one of those schools have any players worth a damn for the draft or for other teams to pick out of the portal. So they add, a piece in Matt Aloco from Princeton, I think is really interesting. Like, he wasn't a super heavy set shot guy, but he was elite off the dribble. Like, he's kind of a little bit of a throwback, like 6'4" off ball guard.
Yeah.
That kind of doesn't need a whole lot of space, but can score at literally any spot on the floor. Just one of those white guys who can shoot. And you tie that around with Braden Shrewsbury. You bring back kind of the front court of Njai and Koznezi. And Tay Davis. Like, Tay Davis is still an elite defender. They're going to grind you down at the slowest pace and make you play just terrible basketball. I always kind of believed in Shrews on the offensive side of the ball, right? They were 234th nationally in offense last year, 39th in defense. If the defense is going to be top 40, I guarantee the offense is going to be better than 230, right? So that's the upside of the team, but it's fully baked in with the 66 and 69 preseason rankings.
I just don't see another player on this team that has any upside besides Marcus Burton. Unless it comes from Jai, I just don't see anyone on this roster that elevates, a team on a nightly basis outside of Burton. Maybe they don't need that because they're playing so slow with not many possessions in games, but I don't know. I don't see it. I think this is a next season type of team, for me at least. Any last thoughts on Notre Dame here?
I mean, it's not too dissimilar from what he had, at Penn State, right? It's like no real good bigs, but you had just an elite point guard. I'm not saying Marcus Burton as a sophomore is Jalen Pickett as a 6th-year senior.
I was going to say, hold up.
but there's shoes around. There's still kind of the makings of it. That Penn State team finished 36, but yeah, I still think kind of the mid-60s is more ceiling than anything.
That team for Penn State had Jalen Pickett, who was the number 8 overall player at Ken Palm on the season, Seth Lundy, who got drafted that year, Andrew Funk, Cameron Winter, Miles Dredd. That's a way better roster than this. All right, but let's keep it moving to a team that I do
Kanye
like.
Clary, freshman Kanye Clary too.
Yeah, Frosh Clary, who we'll talk about next week, I think. Let's go to Pitt, a team that I do like. What an awesome season last year for Capel. He was, speaking of a guy who has bounced back from being on the hot seat to, in a really good spot. They lose Bub Carrington to the draft, kind of a surprise one and doneer from where he came in as a recruit, at least. Blake Hinson is gone. Federico is also gone. But they bring in 2 interesting transfers, Damian Dunn and Cam Corrin. I think Corrin I think they're both interesting, and we'll talk about both here. But thoughts on Pitt last year and thoughts on what they are bringing into 24-25?
Dude, they finished 4th in the ACC last year. They tied for 2nd the year before. Last year they started 62nd in Ken Palm, ended 40th. They also lost 2 NBA guys. God, that Bub Carrington prop was sweet, but they're still 3rd in percent of returning minutes in the conference. So You still bring back the, kind of the foundation. You bring in, I think there's more kind of upside than what you're giving Damian Dunn. Like the Cam Corrin upside, is pretty obvious. Like it's a high rate guy who just got stuck in the Leonard Hamilton rotation, but like, God forbid Damian Dunn learn how to play any defense at Houston and can still be kind of the off the dribble threat that he was at Temple. The whole thing about Capel is having these, kind of like NC State, having these pro level guards that can just go literally beat guys off the dribble. It was like Jamarius Burton a couple years ago, right?
Yep.
Then it was like Bub Carrington and like Leggett at times. You still bring back Leggett. Jalen Lowe is like a breakout player candidate in the conference, just kind of came out of nowhere and was way more usable in a still really loaded backcourt, and still found a way to be productive in real life and in DFS. So yeah, bringing kind of back that core with a couple of pieces, it still kind of plays to the Capel style. Jeff Capel has one of the 5 best ATS percentages the last 3 years of any power conference coach. Like it's actually
because he's had sick guards carrying him.
It's incredible. I looked at that when I was going through I've gone through every single Power 5, or I don't even know how many conferences, power conference coach. And it was like him, Dan Hurley, because he's had 12 ATS covers the last 2 years in the tournament. Like, and it's pretty impressive. So yeah, you got to start giving Capel his flowers. I mean, back-to-back top 30 KenPom offenses. The thing about last year was the top 50 defense, right? That was the first time Capel had a top 50 defense since Blake Griffin was at Oklahoma, right?
Wow.
He just retired from the NBA, in case you weren't aware. So that's how long it's been. But just the shot making is insane. 84th and 98th percentile last 2 years, point per possession basis on guarded jumpers. How sustainable is that with this lineup? Tend to think it kind of actually, is with the guys that he has. So still should be in the mix, probably middle of the conference, I think is safe to say for these guys.
Yeah, so here's where I'm at with Pitt. I think the starting 5, like their top 5, 6, really, really strong in this conference. It's a theme for me in this conference. The teams with reliable backcourts that I like, I'm going to be higher on. They have 3 really good ones here. Leggett was awesome last year, comes back for his grad season. Probably pushes up over 30 minutes a game here. Low, man, he exploded down the stretch. When Leggett missed some time, what was it, like in February? He played really, really well. It was a guy that we were both on probably a bit too early in DFS, and then kind of rode that out down the stretch. You're vacating Hinson's, 27, 28% shot rate.
I thought you were going to say 27 3-pointers per game. That might have been accurate too.
Yeah, I mean, so how do they replace that? He shot 42% from 3. That actually surprised me. I felt like Hinson was pretty inconsistent last year. Maybe we just found his floor games. But yeah, I mean, that 3-headed backcourt, we saw Dunn, in a role at Temple that was way different, obviously, than, he goes to Houston, comes off the bench, a key bench role on that team, obviously. Brings some experience to this roster, and then the front court has upside. Like I'm more into these front courts that have upside guys than just like an older guy who's been there who just because he's returning, they have him like ranked higher. Like I like Cam Corum, I like Diaz Graham, because the upside for these guys is just so high if they hit. We've seen them play well in limited time. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that front court. My concern with Pitt, Gav, after this top 6, you got nobody. You've got a Bosnian freshman, 2 3-stars, and Papa Amadou Kante, who missed last year with an injury. So what we could see, though, for DFS, Gav, is like they just play 7 guys, so we could see really tight minutes, especially around that low Leggett Dunn. So I think that the guards on this team for DFS are going to be really, really valuable. Any last thoughts here?
I actually think the best asset on the team will be Guillermo Diaz Graham. In the role that he's stepping into with his Hakeem rate, he's currently projected for the 5th best defensive BPR on Evan Mia this year. in the conference.
Wow.
Yeah, not nationally, in the conference. But I think speaks to kind of the on-offs with having him on the floor versus that bot Federico. So nice they named him twice. Like, he's a guy. He's legit 7 feet tall, can shoot 3-pointers and block shots. I mean,
Shot
like
40.5% from 3 last year.
I am. Yeah, you're selling me on Pitt a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. Like Damian Dunn. We're going to talk about one of Damian Dunn's former teammates later on in the show. Damian Dunn is a potential dude in this conference. Like, that's not out of the question.
I mean, that's a really good backcourt, especially if Lowe takes the jump that we think he's going to. The depth is a concern. Maybe we bet him a bunch early until someone gets hurt, and we will know when to hit the eject button on this team. Like if like Leggett and Dunn get hurt, it's over, Johnny. Not much depth whatsoever on this roster unless one of the freshmen comes out of nowhere. Let's keep it moving. We got a couple teams left. Let's go to one of the new teams. SMU comes over from the American. Good season last year for SMU, 20-13 under it's a new coach now. Your old coach, Andy Enfield, comes in. They lose Zurich Phelps, Sam Williamson are the 2 big losses. They bring in some interesting transfers. I want to know what you think about this because I have thoughts on this roster construction, but they bring in Boopie Miller, who was good at Wake last year, Kario Okendo, Matt Cross from UMass, and Traore from UCSB are the big 4 transfer gets. Thoughts on SMU joining the conference here? We've seen them in college football just spend a shitload of money. I think that they're like long-term, I think that they're going to be a good fit in this conference just because it's such a rich school with really good NIL.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, thank you for what you did for the USC program. It cannot be understated that you've raised the floor of my heralded alma mater, but you're also an extremely mid coach. I mean, it just finishes between 45th and 85th every year on KenPom that he doesn't have a generational college basketball player in Evan Mobley. And I will say generational with confidence, given the two-way ability and what he did. Because clearly, Andy Enfield can't finish inside the top 45 without him. So, I mean, it is what it is, right? I actually think the SMU, one of the biggest losses with the interior defense of Tyreek Smith. Like, I think that's a little bit understated. Zurich Phelps wasn't the most efficient guy. They moved him off the ball last year for Chuck Harris. And, especially his 3-point efficiency went off the mark. He's not a good catch and shoot guy. But regardless, SMU last year basically tossing out everything, right? No Rob Lanier. Now it's Andy Enfield. They only returned 33% of minutes, most of that being Chuck Harris. You start with the new guys in Boopie, great in ISO, great solo shot creator, plus pick and roll handler. He actually just played next to 2 other combo guards, right, at Wake. So I don't worry about as much with him. Okendo, he's going to.
I worry about Okendo.
I worry about Okendo. Because if Okendo is there, that means that Chuck Harris is basically just spotting up as a 3-point shooter, and it's mostly Boopie handling the ball because Okendo's main strength is putting pressure on the rim.
Yeah.
He took 188 shots last year. 107 were at the rim for a guy who's 6'4". I mean, that is an insane number. He's an athletic swing 2-3 guy. Didn't have great spot up numbers like you mentioned, but the biggest pickup for SMU is Matt Cross, no question.
Yep.
The kind of guy who, like I said before, can literally fit on any team. When you're a high skill power forward who can stretch the floor in college basketball, you are going to fit on any single team that you play in. And yeah, it's his 4th program, I think, at this point. Like it's been a little bit of a friggin' mess, but he's finally getting there. He was great at UMass. I mean, provides great spacing for the multitude of attacking guards that they have, like I just mentioned in Boopie and Okendo. Traore is maybe the swing piece. Like he was extremely efficient around the rim in the Big West. Post ups, rim runs predominantly. Showed a little bit of range to 17-ish feet, but you're not getting anything more than that. It's a good pairing with Matt Cross. he's probably a functional big, but he's not anything outstanding. So, SMU, you want to call them back end of the middle of the conference versus top of the back end. That's kind of where I'm at with them.
So my concern here, Gav, is Boopy, Chuck Harris, and Kario Kendo all on the court at the same time. You're going to hemorrhage points. There's only one ball. And Matt Cross didn't come to SMU to, have a reduced role. I think we've got 4 guys there who want the ball every possession. I think that this could go south, especially like you said with Andy Enfield, who is not shown to elevate his players. I think this is a weird fit. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's an SMU alum and donor. It was basically like, hey, we want to prove that moving forward, we're going to spend money in NIL. And that's what they did. They went and bought Boopy Harris. They went and bought Cross. And they definitely spent on Traore, former top 25 recruit at Auburn. Just kind of seems like it's like an island of misfit toys to me. I do like Cross as a player, but he went to UMass as like a big usage guy, high steal rate. Is he going to be okay being maybe the third option on this team? I don't know. Do you have any of those same, it's role allocation, I think could be, and usage allocation, I think could be a sticking point from a bunch of guys that they brought in that they just paid.
Yeah, there's a concern. I mean, there's also like BJ Edwards returns on the bench. There's Keon Ambrose Hilton, who's going to eat into minutes like at the 4 and the 5.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a little bit clunky. The role allocation isn't super clear as much as I know that the best lineup is probably Cross, Traore, Boopy, and Harris, but I don't know if Okendo is kind of the final piece of that, or if it's, I don't know, playing Cross, because Andy Enfield, played a bunch of zone at USC. You could even play Cross at the 3 and play like a 2-3 zone where you're not just getting wrecked on defense. Like that's still in the card. So
I think Edwards ends up starting over Okendo just because he's so good defensively. And I don't know. I think that they should kind of use Okendo as a bench piece. We're getting in the weeds here for SMU. Yeah. Any last thoughts here before we move on? I have some concerns, but the talent level is definitely there with Boopy and Cross and Traore.
Yeah, I don't know how much else to add. They're projected 57th on Torvik, 74th on Ken Palm. That's probably their range of outcomes right there, like somewhere in that. I don't know if it gets like crazy bad beyond kind of that 75 range. And I definitely don't think that there's upside to be in the top 50.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to a team, another new team, Stanford, that we might be able to save some time on here. 14-18, 105th at Ken Palm last year. They lose Carlisle in the portal, Brandon Angel in the portal, Stojakovic, who we talked about earlier, Jared Bynum's gone, and both Jones, Michael and Spencer, are gone. They don't bring in much in the portal. They bring in Darren Saran from Irvine, who we'll talk about, Jalen Blakes from Duke, who's kind of log jammed, and your old friend Uzziah Sellers from SC come in the door. Gavin, overall thoughts here. We saw just a monster season from Reno last year, and all the usage pieces are gone around him. So this is all systems go for Maxime Reno here.
Yeah, he's gonna have to be a 9K guy out the shoot. But I mean, for Stanford, I'm pretty much wiping most of last season's stats out. Right? They had 2 huge portal gets. One was keeping Maxime Reno. The other is Kyle Smith, their coach, upgrading from Jared Haas. Cannot be understated the upgrade in coaching that is. Basically you bring in you mentioned Sellers. I think he's kind of the first person you look to after Renault, right? He started 6 games for SC when Boogie and Isaiah Collier were out. In those 6 games, he's averaged 11.5 points, and 5 of those 6 were over 100 O rating games. So he's going to be an interesting piece. Darian Saran's, he's like a Turkish slashing point guard that from UC Irvine that is not going to be much of a shooter, but he's a pretty crafty guy, kind of in the paint. Jalen Blake's former Duke, 5-star, kind of stout body, more defensive minded guy. And then Chisholm Akpara, Akbar is actually kind of interesting, man. Small forward, power forward guy, played power forward center in the Ivy League, but he's going to have to play down in the ACC. Sub 100 O rating in conference isn't that great, but 104.9 against tier A, B, and has some tools inside and out. I think that can work. So I think it basically is almost lock in Reno just every slate until he legit is going to be one of the best DFS assets in the entire country this year.
Yeah.
And then it's basically look at Sellers, look at Okpara. Maybe if Blake's emerges, but I just have never seen it from that guy. Not even in stretches of multiple years at Duke. Team's going to be ugly. I think one thing I'll add for Reno, Kyle Smith at Washington State, they were a 97th percentile post up frequency team, and Reno was an 89th percentile post up point per possession guy. Born and bred for Kyle Smith's system. It's probably a 20 point per game plus type season from him.
Yeah, he was top 80 nationally in effective field goal percentage last year, top 15 defensive rebound rate. We could see him average 20 and 10. He was 15 and a half and 9.6 last year with actual scores around him. I don't see it with Blake's. Don't really see it with Sellers. Maybe more of a real life fit than DFS. Saran was interesting. Irvine, that was a tournament team last year, right? But again, kind of like Charleston, deep bench, top. I think they were 22nd in bench minutes. So if we can see Saran, he's probably going to start, I would assume, on this team. He was 0.96 fantasy points per minute at Irvine. Only 19 minutes a game there, but if we see him bump up, start and play mid to high 20s minutes, I think that he's a guy that we should keep an eye on, especially early on in the season. Gav, any last thoughts here?
Yeah, not a ton more to add. Just Kyle Smith's one of the better, lesser known coaches in college basketball. Stanford last year ended 105th in KenPom. In a worse conference with now everyone except Maxine Reynaud and Benny Geeler, former walk-on, returning or have left, and now they're ranked 99th in KenPom. I just don't see this being a top 100 team. Definitely back end of the conference. They'll finish as high up in the back tier of the conference as much as Reynaud can carry them there.
Yeah. Last note before we move on, Washington State last year, 322nd in tempo, 319th the year before. So a slower team under Kyle Smith for sure. So going to have to be more efficient for the counting stats to get there for Reynaud, but I think that he'll be able to do that. All right, let's move on to Syracuse. Big loss. Judah Mintz goes to the NBA. Malik Brown, we talked about earlier, went to Duke. Kadir Copeland, really nice piece for them last year, also gone. But they bring in some interesting transfers here. Eddie Lampkin, Carlos from Hofstra, and then they have a top 15 5-star recruit, Downey Freeman, coming in. 20 and 12 last year, ended 80th at KenPom, above 500 in conference under Autry. What do you think of his moves here in the offseason?
They tied for 5th in the ACC in Red Autry's first year. That was way over expectation. Increased 25 spots in KenPom. They beat North Carolina. They were 6-2 in close games on Torvik, which are 2-possession games. So, without an elite coach, I tend to think that that's a little bit more luck driven. So maybe they were fortunate in that department. But yeah, the Syracuse, dropped from zone defense, dropped from 90% to 20% frequency wise. So it was a much different team. Tempo increase. But yeah, Judah Mintz and Malik Brown kind of bookending that team at point guard and center, and what they did for the team, both offensively with Mintz and defensively with Brown, is just really difficult to understate, loss wise. That being said, Jaquan Carlos, I think is one of the best one of the best mid-major up transfers, true point guards, real facilitators of offense. 2.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio. He's going to be just perfect for Chris Bell and, his ability to shoot as a 3-pointer guy. He was an 88th percentile point per possession shooter. Nothing to worry about there. JJ Starling is kind of a swing piece, right? Kind of came in highly heralded in Notre Dame as an offensive guy, transferred, was a miserable player last year when you look at any sort of on-offs. Like he's a
so
supposed
bad.
He was a supposed offensive-minded guard, yet Hughes was 6 points better offensively per 100 possessions without him on the floor. And then defense. Yeah, you don't even need to talk about his defense. It's not great. So, yeah, it's Freeman. Kind of what I've heard from Freeman, it's like highly touted power forward. There's like really good feel and tools, but it's underdeveloped physically, like especially in his lower half where, he's going to be getting pushed out of the paint, but does have ability to kind of stretch to the three. So, he'll be an interesting piece and one to monitor. I mean, Eddie Lampkin, Colorado was a mega post-up frequency team. Hughes was one of the lowest post-up frequency teams last year. Not an ideal fit, but the man wants his NIL and the man deserves his NIL, and we love him for it. So, we're fine with that. Jair Davis was a power forward center at Delaware, probably slides into more of a small forward, power forward role. 81% free throw shooter, maybe can stretch it out, to three. Then maybe there's some upside in his 25% 3-point percentage mark. But yeah, I don't know, just kind of a piece. Lucas Taylor, Georgia State transfer, bench 3-point shooter. Hard not to see them, taking a somewhat of a step back just with how over expectation they were last year. I tend to think that they're also kind of relatively, accurately tracked here at right around the 70th mark on both sides.
Yeah, Mintz, huge blow to the upside, I think, of this team. 38th nationally in usage rate. But also, the ball stuck with him a lot. I think Carlos, like you said, is going to be a great fit here. Averaged over 6 assists per game, 60th nationally. Bell, like you said, is going to be a huge beneficiary there. Starling, I've never been a Starling guy. He was terrible last year. I was talking with Jim Root, and he said Starling last year on Evan Mia was like the 1,500th ranked player in the country. Pretty bad. So I think that this is going to be a lot on the 5-star. I think that they're going to give him the keys to play out of the gate, and I think they're going to need him. Hopefully, it's not another Benny Williams situation for them. Got a 3-4. Small forward, power forward, 5-star recruit at Syracuse. I'm having flashbacks here, Gav, but signs are that he's going to be a good player. So this is kind of a team where I don't really know where I'm at. I kind of pretty locked in on where I think the first dozen or so teams that we've talked about are going to end up, Gav. But on this one, I think there's a wider range of outcomes. I think with Freeman there, with Carlos being just like a different type of point guard than Mintz, I think that there's a wide range of outcomes. What we do know is that they're going to play fast. So, and
they're not going to play defense and don't have Malik Brown.
Yes. So they're going to play fast. And what did I have a note on? They didn't really play much of the bench last year either. We see Starling here, 34.4 minutes a game. 312th nationally in bench minutes. So the guys that are out there are going to be playing. Like you said with Lamp, he's going to have to do more of a mop-up role than offense flowing through him. So, I think that'll be fine. Any last thoughts here on Syracuse?
Negative.
All right, let's go to UVA. Interesting year last year for UVA. They snuck into the tournament somehow at 68th at KenPom. I think they were the lowest ranked KenPom team from a power conference to make the tournament. They get absolutely waxed in the first round, look terrible. Love to see that. But huge losses here. I've seen a lot of juice nationally for Virginia being a top 5 team in this conference this season. That's got to be all Tony Bennett because this team loses Reese Beekman and Ryan Dunn and Jordan Meyer. So I think that those are just bigger shoes to fill than maybe people nationally are thinking about because they're bringing in Day-Day Adams from K-State, the small point guard. Not sure how he's going to fit with Tony Bennett. Jalen Worley and TJ Power from Duke and Elijah Saunders from San Diego State. Gav, thoughts on this roster here? And then I'll give mine.
Yeah, I mean, it is all Tony Bennett, right? They finished third in the ACC last year somehow. Also ended up being 69th in Ken Palm by the end of the year. Fell from 33rd to 69th by the end of the year. Like, and yeah, everyone saw the tournament appearance, and that's what's going to stick in their mind. It was the seventh best defense on Ken Palm. They also had, I don't know, two of the 10 best defenders in the country in Ryan Dunn and Reese Beekman. Like some of the best positional defenders. Like, by the way, I don't know if you saw the clip of Ryan Dunn getting a rub screen in a preseason game and just smoking big off the dribble from three. I was like, there's no way. There's that. It's an actual AI double. But I mean, they return a lot of minutes. Isaac McNeely is going to be one of the best shooters in the conference. Maybe the country is perfect for the Tony Bennett system, running off a ton of screens. Bringing Jalen Warley, I think, is really interesting, right? Like, Warley played a lot of point guard at Florida State because he couldn't shoot the ball and could put pressure on the rim. But he's 6'7". Like, he can play a lot of that Ryan Dunn role where you just stick him on the best 2 through 4 matchup on the team. The defensive floor of Virginia is just going to be high. It is what it is. Couple like the swing pieces, like TJ Power, former Duke transfer, like former top 20 recruit. He was a guy who was older for his grade. So maybe there's some, points for being a little bit more of an elder statesman as a sophomore, 21-year-old in a system like Tony Bennett. Blake Buchanan, I think, is going to be a really interesting DFS piece. The rates weren't actually as great as I thought they were last year, but man, like there's not much front court help. Power's not going to be any sort of like rim protector. You're not going to need a rim protector in the Bennett pack line defense, but like Andrew Rohde cannot physically shoot the ball worse if he walked out onto the floor with a blindfold every game. He shot that poorly last year. Like you can only go up from him. Projected 78th on Ken Palm, 65th on Torvik. I think they could be no, never mind. They finished 69th by the end of last year with that team. No, they're outside the top 50. This is probably 60 to 80, 85 team.
That's what I'm saying. I don't see so a bunch of publications, I won't name them, have Virginia like ahead of Wake and ahead of Clemson. I do not see it.
There's no fucking way. There is no way.
So like
you want to stay over like a Louisville? Okay, fine. With Louisville having that many new transfers, like maybe the consistency of Tony Bennett finishes ahead of him in the conference. Okay, I'm fine with that. Wake and Clemson get all the way the fuck out of here.
Yeah. So what are they going to do at point guard? Are they just going to start Ames? I don't think he's good enough defensively to like fit with Tony Bennett. Like, and if it's not Ames, who the hell is initiating offense on this team? Because like you said, McNeely is like a perfect piece for the offense, but more of like a catch and shoot off screen guy. Worley, we've seen him do it some, but wasn't great. Like you said, is a better off ball. It's not going to be Andrew Rohde. Like I don't see how they initiate offense. They were 200th nationally in adjusted offense last year with Reese Beekman running the show, and he was incredible. So, yeah, I just don't see the ceiling here unless Power is really special. Power, he didn't play much, Gab, but 9.3 3-point attempts per 40 minutes. So showed that he can stretch it a bit, or at least is trying to. So yeah, I'm lower on this roster just because the two losses that they have, Gab, I think might be the two biggest in the entire conference, just like the way that they want to play.
I can get behind that. Yeah. I mean, and when Tony Bennett has had NBA talent in the past, like a DeAndre Hunter, he's been good. When he hasn't had it, it's been less enthusiastic, we'll say. I was looking back, like, yeah, this is a team that's had Kihei Clark and Reese Beekman at the point guard for the last 6 years, one of those two guys. And now there's complete questions like Elijah Gertrude. I didn't even know a 70 O rating was possible. Like, I don't even, that my brain can't even compute how bad offensively that is. I don't know if he's the guy, but yeah, there's definite questions at the point guard position for a team that wants to play slow out of the point guard spot in the half court. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. I've got my Virginia Tech jersey on here.
You take the reins on this team. I'm gonna rest up for the next one.
I've got my Malcolm Delaney jersey on. We would die for a player like Malcolm Delaney this year. Really tough end to last season. End up 58 at Kent Palm, 10-10 in conference under Mike Young. I think we're going to struggle moving forward in the NIL sphere just because VT doesn't have that much that goes into the basketball program. We saw it in the portal. We talked about Lynn Kidd leaving earlier. Hunter Couture graduates, but we also lose Sean Padula, who transferred to Ole Miss to like possibly come off the bench instead of being a mega usage guard here for his senior year. So just real concerns moving forward with the state of the program. We've got a good X's and O's coach, but not a guy who's ever recruited well at all at the power conference level. So, going into our roster, we basically have a Wofford roster, which is where we're at this year. We got Heiser Miller from Temple, who played a bunch last year, but was not very efficient. Jaden Shutt, who redshirted at Duke last year, is probably going to start. Ben Burnham from Charleston is who we brought to ACC Media Day. He was uber efficient on a deep Charleston team. Gavin, I think he's going to be the leading scorer on this team.
Did you say Ben Burnham?
Ben Burnham
on an ACC team. Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly.
No, that's top BPR on Charleston last season. Ben Burnham. No, I think that we're in trouble here. I think the bottom's going to fall out. You can talk more about like his schemes, but like I don't think we have the shooters that we need to for the type of system that he wants to run. Basically, our only returner is Poteet, and then the young kids that didn't play that much as a freshman last year, Rex Steiner and Jane Young. It's a super young team outside of Miller. We got Lawal from VCU, who's more of like an athlete than a basketball player at this point. He brings us some much needed athleticism, but man, I think it's going to be rough. Good coach, but I kind of said this when we hired him, I just don't think he's a high major coach.
It sounds like Mike Young is turning into Andy Enfield. You appreciate the floor raising that he provided the program, but boy, you just haven't quite hit the ceiling that you need to. Now, that being said,
no. That was Buzz
the
Williams.
Resources are not different.
Buzz Williams raised the floor of the program.
How dare you? We'll talk about Buzz later, but my main thing with Virginia Tech, I would say Mike Young is a good X's and O's guys. When you think of Mike Young offenses, you think of pin downs, you think of staggers, shooters running off screens every different direction, multiple guys that can knock down from the perimeter. I don't know who the fuck can do it on this team. Heisier Miller hit 2.1 threes per game. He also shot at a sub 30% rate and a sub 100 O rating. So it's like he was on the bench of the Temple team that Damian Dunn was running, and Damian Dunn is the third option on Pitt to kind of give you like some reference,
Also, this is the Temple team that was actively throwing games last year.
Actively throwing games. Like Ben Burnham hit 1.3 threes per game at 36%. Like those are the only two guys that averaged more than 1 3 per game last year in an offense predicated on shooters running off screens and shooting threes. So it's just terrifying. But Jaden Schutt, I think, is interesting. Like tore his ACL midway through his freshman season after he wasn't playing, redshirted because he couldn't come back in time. Now he's at Virginia Tech, was billed as an incredible knockdown shooter, like one of the better shooters in the class. Sounds like a souped up version of Hunter Couture, honestly. But that's about the nicest thing I could say about him.
Yeah, well, he was like a top 80 guy. It's just like we don't have ACC talent. He's not recruiting ACC talent. We can't pay for ACC talent. This might be the first school that we talked about besides Duke and Carolina, Gav, where I agree with the Torvik and Ken Pom rankings. They're like 88, 92. I think that it's going to be something like that, and then we'll see if Mike Young stays. All right, we got about 10 minutes left. Let's go to Wake Forest. Saved the best for last year. They lose Boopy Miller, who we talked about, to SMU. Andrew Carr transferred out. But, man, they cleaned up in the transfer portal here. Tyler Johnson from Louisville, Trayvon Spillers from App State, who I know that you'll touch on. And then a really interesting get, Omaha Iliu, who was a 5-star last season, couldn't really get on the floor for Iowa State, but obviously talented. I'll let you take it away here for Wake.
Yeah, you tie for 5th in the ACC. You finish 28th on Ken Pom after starting 73. Like that's a generally good season, but you missed the tournament for a team that I think a lot of people kind of had pegged earlier in the year to go. There were a couple kind of main issues. One was away from home, they were miserable. It was 329th rating on Haslam for the away from home metric. They had 2 ACC road wins, right? Boston College and Georgia Tech. You'll notice that Louisville is not in that. They lost to Louisville on the road. Like their only non-con win away from home was on a neutral versus Townsend. They lost to Georgia twice, including the NIT. They lost to LSU early, and they lost to Utah early, all without Efton Reed, mind you. Efton Reed had his first year starting last year, kind of not mid-season, but third of the way through after the waivers got cleared. Like he's a super high upside guy, but the defense also collapsed late. They beat Duke at home. And then the next 4 like late in the season, they beat Duke at home. The next 4 games, their defense was 196th on Torvik. So defense was terrible. Away from home was terrible. You shore those up, and I think Wake is fine. But the thing is, like, you bring back a guy like Hunter Salas. I mean, Hunter Salas is probably a lock for the first team. Like, I mean, was one of the most incredible breakouts, like, in the entire country, going from a no role to one of the leading scorers of the ACC. And we've just seen it with Steve Forbes in years past. I mean, Alondis Williams was the biggest NPC standard corner you've ever seen in your life at Oklahoma before he was, I think, the ACC Player of the Year 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You bring in Tyree Appleby, who was literally a 3-point specialist under Mike Young. I always get Mike White and Mike Young confused at Florida, and then becomes a first-team All-ACC guy. Now you're bringing in the upside of a guy like a Tyler Johnson, a guy like an Omaha Billy, a former top 25 recruit. I'm just going to trust, Steve Forbes this year. I bet Wake Forest to win the conference. I think this is the team out of the second tier that could threaten a Wake or a Duke. They have a very favorable schedule where they only face
threaten a UNC or a Duke, you mean?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Versus a Clemson or a Louisville of that type. You lose Boopy, but Tyler Johnson might be a higher upside version of Boopy. Like Tyler Johnson, I think, is a better facilitator. I think he was in a situation where he just said, fuck it with Louisville. Like Kenny Payne said he didn't start a game because he didn't have a armband, whatever. Like Steve Forbes ain't going to let that shit fly. He's going to get him on his P's and Q's. It's going to be an incredible backcourt with Tyler Johnson, Hunter Salas, and Hildreth. You got Efton Reed. You got the upside of Billy. Parker Fredrickson is going to provide 3-point shooting for the slashers in Johnson and Hildreth. And then Trevon Spillers, like, he might be the swing piece, right? Because the main thing that they lost last year from the team was Andrew Carr, his ability to not only rebound like a center, play the power forward, and stretch the floor. And Trevon Spiller is definitely not a floor stretcher by any means. He's a little bit of a throwback guy. He's a big physical lefty from App State who is really efficient inside the arc, and a guy that I don't worry as much about scoring in the manner that he scored at the mid-major level at the high major level, because he's going to be as big as those high major guys. He's a big ass dude, big broad shouldered, kind of, I would say like between 12 and 15 foot kind of range, and is pretty crafty in that. So there's a lot of offensive talent. And when you have the dude like Hunter Salas that can go for 25, 30 points any given night, I'm going to be betting some alts on my guy Yeg, and we're going to be hitting on some Hunter Salas 25, 30 point props this year for sure.
Yeah, Spillers, he comes in as a sophomore too. So he was a true freshman last year. 126 O rating, was top 65 nationally. And, they lose Carr, but it's not like Carr was a good defender. I just checked on Mia while you were talking. Last year's Spillers on App State ranked better than Carr here on Wake. There's some nuance to that, but yeah, man, this is the squad. This is big time upside. You just don't get like non-UNC, Duke, Louisville teams in this conference that have 3 5-star recruits on the roster. Hunter Salas, Efton Reed, and then Billy U. So, yeah, the talent is there. Tyler Johnson, I'll start with him. Yeah, I mean, he flashed on that team. 52nd nationally in assist rate. They get a guy to move Salas off the ball yet again. And I think, like you said, this is going to be a better fit, a higher upside fit, probably more range of outcomes than Boopy, but I think higher upside. Hunter Salas, I think you can make the argument. I think if Cooper Flagg doesn't win ACC Player of the Year, it's going to be Hunter Salas. Arguably the best transfer portal pickup in the entire country last year. Forbes is just, like a guard kingmaker. In the NFL, we have the receiver maker in Matt Stafford, makes anyone good. Steve Forbes has done that with guards, and I think he's going to do it again with Tyler Johnson. This is just such an high upside team in a conference where we have not really been that excited. We've been lower than market on a lot of these teams. I cannot believe that Ken Pom has his team at 44th. Efton Reed, if he cleans up some of the foul issues that was his big issue last year, is just kind of staying in the game. So I just checked, Gav. Last year, 44th at Ken Pom was NC State. So this Wake Forest team is better than last year's NC State team. I just think that they're deep, even though they don't need to be. 351st in bench minutes last year. Just elite DFS plays. Salas played 35.5 a game. Hill just played 34. Even Efton Reed played 28 a game, Gavin. That was through foul trouble too. So, yeah, this is going to be, I might be a bit biased because they're so good for DFS purposes, but I think it's going to be a good real life team too. I get the defensive faltering down the stretch, but the core here of Salas, Hildreth, and Reed coming back. I mean, Salas probably would have been a back end first round pick. The field of 68 guys were talking in one of their previews about the teams that like reach their ceiling when, not out of nowhere, but like teams that can make that jump into the next tier. It almost always happens where a guy that could have left comes back. And that's what we have here with Salas. I think he's, going to make an All-American team, probably third team, but like, man, I love this team. I've been talking about him for a couple of minutes, so I'll let you have your final thoughts here.
Yeah, haven't even added to, like David Crosby is an Alabama transfer who's supposedly like a dead-eye shooter. He's basically a higher upside insurance policy to Parker Friedrichsen. Churchill
he took 14.6 threes per 40 minutes last year.
Playing 90 seconds per game or whatever it was. Like Churchill Abbas's Efton Reed insurance. It was also Efton Reed's first year playing in drop coverage. Like Gonzaga plays a lot more at the level of the screen. And so basically had to completely kind of relearn exactly what he was doing. They kind of found some magic with it. Hopefully that keeps him out of trouble, the second year starting. Just too much to like about these guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is all 18 teams. We were right at 2 hours here. So we'll wrap it up with our all conference teams and our breakout players. I've got mine up here on the screen, Gav. I think we're in lockstep. I think this might be the easiest conference for first team all ACC. I listed 6 guys RJ Davis, Hunter Salas, Cooper Flagg, I think are all three just absolute locks. Reno, Burton, and Watkins are going to be the usage counting stats guys on the first team. And then I think Shefflin has an outside shot. Is there anyone else that you would add to that list for first team all conference?
Yeah, I mean, like I guess the ceiling outcome of a good Louisville is Terrence Edwards driven. There's a chance where Miami's good and Bethea is not a one and done, and Nigel Pack is like a 18, 19 point a game guy instead of Burton. But other than that, I think it was RJ, Flagg, Salas, and then choose 2 of the 3 between Watkins, Reno, and Burton. Reno and Watkins Reno will average double potentially at 20 points a game. Watkins will just be more on the defensive side too, and then Burton may lead the conference in scoring. So that's pick 2 of those 3. I think is where you go. Yeah,
and then for the breakout players, I listed a couple here. I think the most obvious one is Jalen Lowe from Pitt. I've got Elliot Cadeau on this list just because this is like guys in their second year making big jumps. Those are the obvious ones, along with Dongo. Who outside of those 3 super obvious ones do you want to add?
I put okay. So start with like Blake Buchanan. I think Blake Buchanan in his role with the lack of front court depth and what he was kind of held behind his last year at Virginia, I think has a chance to be like 11 and 8 type of guy as an elite offensive rebounder. Ty Lore is in the equation. He's kind of another of those second year guys. Fucking Seth Trimble, holy shit! What we saw in the scrimmage, like he's on the list. Andre Stojakovic, but I think the guy that I'm going for the breakout of the conference is I'm gonna throw the flyer on the Jaden Shute call, just because Virginia Tech is so devoid of any actual players that work within that system, and he's such a clear-cut guy to do it off the injury with an extra half year to kind of recover with a red shirt. I think he's in a really good spot to be like a double-digit scorer from a guy who literally had 0 role previously. So I'll take that for a breakout.
Yeah, my off the board one, I'll go back to Carolina. It's Jalen Washington. Like the 5 spot at Carolina for years and years and years has been a gold mine. He didn't play that much last year, but 1.05 fantasy point per minute. We've kind of used that. It's easier to pick breakout players when you have the per minute stuff, just because it's easier to extrapolate when they get more minutes. Obviously, probably not as efficient, but man, he was good behind Baycott. We saw him shooting threes in the scrimmage, like you said. He's going to be on a good team. He's going to have to play. So I'll go with Jalen Washington there as my pick.
Looked, I mentioned in the Discord, looked noticeably thinner. Looked like he shed a lot of that doughy baby fat that he had freshman year. Was moving his feet much better. It looked really, really good from Jalen Washington in the scrimmage. Could be a huge piece for UNC this year.
Yeah,
glad we didn't forget that.
Yeah, we'll be on him early in DFS too, hoping that he has a good role right out of the gate. All right, we are right around 2 hours here. We went through all 18 ACC teams. We've got a couple more shows coming up. We'll probably, we have to talk about scheduling, but we'll probably try to do 2 next week and then 2 the following week to get our 5 done. So keep an eye out for announcements for that on Twitter, on YouTube, on the Run Pure site. If you're not a sub, go to Run Pure Sports. We do playbooks. We got picks every day, and our Discord is just super fun to be in general. And there's a lot of good information that you're going to need for college, including starting lineups as they come out throughout the season. But yeah, so that'll do it for us here. It was good to be back and chat about teams. I think that the slides kind of helped us as well. So I'll be doing that moving forward for these previews as well. All right. For Gavin, I'm Steve Boynton. We'll see you next time.